Most people think a refrigerator creates cold air. But surprisingly, that's not what it does. A refrigerator's real job is to remove heat from inside the fridge and move it somewhere else. When heat is removed, the inside becomes cold. Think about a hot cup of coffee. If the heat leaves the coffee, it becomes cooler. The same idea applies to a refrigerator. It constantly removes heat from the food, drinks, and air inside the fridge. As long as heat keeps being removed, the inside stays cold. So the next time you open your refrigerator, remember this simple idea. Refrigerators don't create cold. They remove heat, and that's what makes everything inside feel cold. To understand how a refrigerator works, we first need to understand a simple rule of nature. Heat always moves from a warmer place to a cooler place. For example, if you leave a cold drink on a kitchen counter, it slowly warms up over time. That's because heat from the warmer room is moving into the colder drink. The same thing happens with a refrigerator. The air inside the fridge is colder than the air outside, so heat naturally tries to move into the refrigerator. If nothing stopped this process, the fridge would eventually become warm. The refrigerator's job is to continuously remove that incoming heat, keeping the inside cold and your food fresh. So how does a refrigerator actually remove heat? The secret is a special fluid called refrigerant. This fluid constantly travels through a closed loop inside the refrigerator. Its job is to carry heat from one place to another. When the refrigerant passes through the cooling coils inside the fridge, it absorbs heat from the air and food stored inside. It then carries that heat away to another part of the system where it can be released. After releasing the heat, the refrigerant returns and repeats the process all over again. You can think of refrigerant as a heat transporter. Without it, the refrigerator would have no effective way to move heat out and keep the inside cold. Inside the refrigerator is a set of coils called the evaporator. This is where the cooling process really begins. Cold refrigerant flows through these coils and absorbs heat from the air, food, and drinks inside the fridge. As the refrigerant absorbs more heat, the air inside becomes cooler and cooler. You can think of the evaporator like a sponge that soaks up heat instead of water. The important thing to remember is that the heat doesn't disappear. It simply moves from the inside of the refrigerator into the refrigerant. Once the refrigerant has collected that heat, it carries it away so it can be released somewhere else. This is how the refrigerator keeps the inside cold. After the refrigerant absorbs heat from inside the refrigerator, it travels to a component called the compressor. The compressor's job is to squeeze the refrigerant, increasing its pressure. When a gas is compressed, its temperature rises. You may have noticed something similar when pumping air into a bicycle tire. The pump can become warm. The same basic idea happens here. By increasing the pressure, the compressor prepares the refrigerant for the next stage of the cooling cycle. Think of the compressor as the engine of the refrigerator. It keeps the refrigerant moving through the system and helps carry the collected heat toward the outside of the fridge, where it can be released into the room. After leaving the compressor, the refrigerant is now carrying the heat it collected from inside the refrigerator. It then flows through another set of coils called the condenser, usually located at the back or underneath the fridge. Here, the refrigerant releases its heat into the surrounding room air. This is why the back of a refrigerator often feels warm when it's running. The heat that was removed from your food and drinks is being pushed out into the room. As the refrigerant loses this heat, it begins cooling down and prepares for the next stage of the cycle. The condenser's job is simple but important. Get the heat out of the refrigerator and release it into the room. After releasing its heat in the condenser, the refrigerant still needs to become cold again before it can absorb more heat from inside the refrigerator. This happens when it passes through a small component called the expansion valve. As the refrigerant moves through this valve, its pressure suddenly drops. When the pressure drops, the refrigerant cools down dramatically. Think about how a spray can feel cold when you use it for a while. A similar principle is happening here. The refrigerant is now cold and ready to absorb heat once again. It then returns to the evaporator, where the cycle continues. This cooling step prepares the refrigerant for another round of heat removal. At this point, the refrigerant has become cold again and is ready to absorb more heat. It returns to the evaporator inside the refrigerator, where the entire process starts over. First, it absorbs heat from inside the fridge. Then the compressor increases its pressure. Next, the condenser releases that heat into the room. Finally, the expansion valve cools the refrigerant again. This cycle repeats continuously, day and night, to keep the refrigerator cold. The refrigerator isn't creating cold air every time it runs. Instead, it is constantly moving heat from inside the fridge to the room outside. As long as this cycle continues, your food and drinks stay cold and fresh. Every time you open the refrigerator door, warm air from the room enters the fridge. Remember, heat naturally moves from warmer places to cooler places. So when the door is open, heat quickly flows inside and raises the temperature. The refrigerator then has to work harder to remove that extra heat and bring the temperature back down. The longer the door stays open, the more heat enters and the more energy the refrigerator uses. That's why repeatedly opening the door or leaving it open for too long can make the refrigerator less efficient. Keeping the door closed helps keep the cold air inside, the heat outside, and your food at the right temperature. Now we can see that a refrigerator doesn't actually create cold air. Instead, it continuously moves heat from inside the refrigerator to the room outside. The refrigerant absorbs heat inside the fridge, carries it through the system, and releases it through the condenser. Then the cycle repeats again and again. This simple process keeps food cold and helps prevent it from spoiling. In many ways, a refrigerator is really a heat-moving machine. Its entire purpose is to take heat from where you don't want it and move it somewhere else. So the next time you feel the back of your refrigerator getting warm, you'll know exactly why. It's the heat that was removed from inside the fridge. There's always more to discover. Like, share, and subscribe to Beyond Basics for more fascinating videos made simple.